Hello everyone, Dark of all Trades here. With my expertise in linguistics, I happened upon a topic I haven't really discussed at length with anyone yet. It is simple, but it can come off as quite complex. So perhaps I should start with a scenario. Imagine reading a story where each character and event whispers hints of a larger narrative waiting to unfold. This is typology, a pretty neat interpretive lens that reveals deep interconnections across historical and literary landscapes, and not the scientific study of typos and their role in history and the world. In biblical scholarship, typology suggests that God communicates through patterns. Earlier events are not random, but intentional previews that prefigure more profound moments. When we read about an Old Testament prophet or an encounter in ancient narrative, typology has us looking deeper, seeing these moments not as isolated stories, but as carefully placed pieces of colored glass in the grand, unified stained glass window of meaning. So for today's video, I'm going to check out a church channel called Vocab Malone, Street Apologist. Trust me, I'm doing everything I can to not make a reference. So to move on quickly before I do, the video is titled, Why Atheists Can't Believe in Typology. Now, I'm not sure about why he says atheists can't believe in anything other than the existence of a God. When it comes to atheism, literally everything else besides that is open. Any atheist could possibly believe in anything other than that a God exists, and trust me, I've met some who believe some, well, we'll just say interesting things. I wonder if he's conflating atheist with naturalist, or more likely someone who doesn't believe in prophecy. But I don't want to presume. I'd rather hear it straight from Vocab Maloney, Street Apologisty. So let's see what he has to say.
Only heaven silence for an answer.
Typology is historical correspondence, a pattern established over here that repeats over there.
Okay, before I get too much into this video, I want to talk a little bit about typology. I touched on it a bit in the intro, but I want to take it a bit further. According to the Googles, typology is a classification according to general type, especially in archaeology, psychology, or the social sciences. Though since this is a religy boy, I'm going to give the second definition on the Googles as the study and interpretation of types and symbols, originally especially in the Bible. Typology is a rich hermeneutical approach that transforms how we read historical narratives. Imagine scriptural text as a complex, multi-layered conversation across time, where an event in the Old Testament isn't just a standalone story, but a prophetic prototype that finds its ultimate meaning in later, more profound revelation. In biblical scholarship, this means that seeing Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, for instance, not just as a historical moment, but as a symbolic prelude to God's ultimate sacrifice of Mr. Jesus. This interpretive method isn't about forcing connections, but recognizing patterns of meaning. It suggests that divine communication occurs through historical echoes, where earlier events are intentional sketches that gain their full significance only when viewed through the lens of later, more comprehensive revelations. The concept of typology has deep roots in both Jewish and Christian interpretive traditions. During the Second Temple period, which is 516 BCE to 70 CE, Jewish scholars developed sophisticated methods of reading their scriptures, looking for patterns that revealed deeper theological truths. This wasn't unique to Judaism. Ancient Near Eastern cultures often understood history to be cyclical, with events echoing and reflecting each other in meaningful ways. What makes biblical typology distinctive is its forward-looking nature. Unlike simple pattern recognition, typological interpretation suggests that earlier events called types prefigure later events called antitypes. In a way, that reveals progressive divine revelation. For example, the Exodus isn't just about Israel leaving Egypt. It becomes a template for understanding liberation, redemption, and divine intervention throughout history. Now, modern biblical scholars debate whether typology should be understood as predictive or retrospective. Was Moses consciously writing about future events? Or did later writers recognize patterns in earlier texts? This tension between perspective and retrospective understanding remains a crucial part of typological discussions in contemporary scholarship.
Now what happens is, unbelievers look at that and they say, clearly Luke was ripping off the Old Testament prophets to make it seem like Jesus was fulfilling the prophecy.
When confronting typological interpretation, critical scholars often raise a provocative question. Are these biblical correspondences genuine revelations or calculated literary constructions? The fabrication hypothesis suggests that gospel writers like Luke strategically reinterpreted Old Testament texts, reshaping historical narratives to retrospectively align with Mr. Jesus' life. This isn't mere coincidental similarity, but a deliberate hermeneutical strategy where earlier prophetic texts are selectively reframed to create an illusion of messianic prediction. However, this review oversimplifies the complex interpretive landscape. It assumes a purely instrumental approach to textual interpretation, overlooking the sophisticated theological and literary conventions of the Second Temple Judaism, where interconnected scriptural reading was a nuanced scholarly practice. The relationship between early Christian writings and Jewish scriptures is far more complex than simple copying or fabrication. Literary scholars point out that ancient writers operated with different concepts of authorship and intertextuality than we do today. The practice of drawing parallels between texts, known as midrash in Jewish tradition, was a sophisticated form of interpretation that went beyond mere proof texting. Furthermore, recent scholarship has highlighted how Luke's writing style reflects careful engagement with both Greco-Roman historiography and Jewish interpretive traditions. His use of the Old Testament often follows established patterns of Second Temple Jewish exegesis, suggesting not manipulation, but participation in accepted scholarly practices of his time. The question isn't simply whether Luke copied earlier prophets, but how he engaged with his religious and literary heritage to communicate theological truth. Modern literary theory recognizes that all texts exist in dialogue with earlier texts, what critics call intertextuality. This suggests that we need a more nuanced understanding of how ancient authors used and transformed their sources.
If we hold that God is the author of the story, we say God is orchestrating both events purposefully to show the fulfillment of a promise.
In theological interpretation, divine authorship transforms historical narrative from a series of disconnected events into a meticulously composed story. This perspective argues that God communicates through history itself, each event a carefully positioned note in a grand overarching composition. Unlike human authors who write retrospectively, this theological understanding suggests God simultaneously authors past, present, and future, creating intricate patterns of correspondence that reveal profound theological truths. Consider the example I brought up before, the Exodus narrative. Not merely a historical migration, but a prototype of spiritual liberation that finds its ultimate expression in Mr. Jesus' redemptive work. Each historical moment becomes a deliberate preview of a more comprehensive spiritual reality, suggesting that divine communication transcends linear time, operating through symbolic interconnected revelations. This theological framework draws on a rich tradition of understanding divine providence in history. Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's most influential theologians, developed a sophisticated theory of how God works through historical events while respecting human agency. He suggests that divine authorship doesn't negate human participation, but rather encompasses it within a larger narrative. Modern theological discussions have expanded this concept, exploring how divine authorship might work with human free will and historical contingency. Some theologians propose the model of multiple agency, where both divine and human authorship coexist without contradiction. Others suggest understanding divine authorship through the lens of quantum mechanics, where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously until observed through faith. The idea of God as the ultimate author also raises interesting questions about the nature of time and causality. If God exists outside of time, as many theologians argue, then the relationship between type and antitype might be better understood as simultaneous rather than sequential from God's perspective. This is just a more complex understanding of how divine authorship might work than simple linear prediction.
So your presuppositions do matter in this interpretation.
Atheists, understandably, tend to have a negative connotation for the term presupposition thanks to presuppositional apologetics being so bad. However, presuppositions are simply the lenses through which we interpret reality, intellectual starting points that fundamentally shape our understanding before we even engage with the evidence. In biblical interpretation, these foundational assumptions act like philosophical filters, determining whether we see a text as a divine revelation or a human construction. Imagine two scholars reading the same biblical passage. One approaches with a naturalistic worldview, seeing coincidences and human authorship. Another approaches with a theological perspective, perceiving intentional divine communication. Their presuppositions don't just subtly influence, they dramatically reframe the entire interpretive landscape. The same textual evidence becomes radically different narratives, demonstrating how our initial philosophical commitments are not neutral, but profoundly generative in creative meaning. The role of presuppositions in biblical interpretation extend beyond simple theistic versus naturalistic worldviews. Even with theological traditions, different presuppositional frameworks lead to vastly different readings. For instance, Reformed theologians might emphasize divine sovereignty, while Arminian scholars might highlight human free will, both working from theistic presuppositions but reaching different conclusions. Contemporary hermeneutical theory, influenced by philosophers like Hans-Georg Gadamer, suggests that all understanding involves a fusion of horizons between the reader's presuppositions and the text's historical context. This means that complete neutral interpretation is impossible. Everyone brings some framework to their reading. The key is being conscious of our presuppositions and willing to engage in dialogue with different perspectives. It is worth noting that presuppositions aren't simply binary choices between belief and unbelief. Scholars might hold various positions on historical methodology, literary theory, or philosophical naturalism that influence their interpretation without necessarily determining their religious beliefs. An atheist historian might accept supernatural explanations in ancient texts while personally maintaining naturalistic beliefs, just as a Christian scholar might apply critical methods while maintaining faith commitments.
Versus seeing a contrivance, you'll see a fulfillment.
Fulfillment and contrivance represent two radically different hermeneutical approaches to understanding historical narrative. Contrivance suggests a human-engineered illusion, a deliberate manipulation of text to create false sense of predictive coherence. In contrast, fulfillment proposes a more profound interpretive framework. Historical events are not random or artificially constructed, but part of a larger, meaningful pattern of divine communication. Think of it like a complex musical composition. Contrivance would be like a musician forcibly inserting notes where they don't belong, creating a jarring, unnatural sound. Fulfillment, however, is like a masterful symphony where seemingly disparate musical themes gradually reveal their interconnectedness, creating a deeper, more meaningful understanding that transcends individual moments. I think opera fans will get a lot of that. In biblical interpretation, this means seeing scriptural narratives not as manipulated texts, but as intentional revelations where each historical moment carries symbolic weight, contributing to a larger, more comprehensive theological understanding. This debate between fulfillment and contrivance touches on deeper questions about the nature of historical truth and literary meaning. Modern literary theory recognizes that texts often contain meanings beyond their author's conscious intentions. This surplus of meaning, as Paul Ricoeur called it, suggests that patterns and connections might emerge legitimately even without deliberate authorial design. Furthermore, the concept of fulfillment in biblical interpretation often operates on multiple levels simultaneously. A prophecy might have an immediate historical fulfillment, a typological fulfillment in Mr. Jesus, and an eschatological fulfillment yet to come. This layered understanding suggests that the dichotomy between fulfillment and contrivance might be oversimplified. Contemporary scholarship has also highlighted how ancient Near Eastern concepts of prophecy and fulfillment differ from the modern expectations of precise prediction. Prophecy often functions as pattern setting rather than specific prediction, establishing paradigms that could be fulfilled in various ways throughout history. And that's the end of his video. A short one, but worth examining. So what were his points here? What is he saying? Why can't atheists believe in typology? Typology is historical correspondence, a pattern established in one part and repeats in another. Unbelievers say, clearly Luke was ripping off the Old Testament prophets to make it seem like Mr. Jesus was fulfilling the prophecy. If God is the author of the story, God is orchestrating both events purposefully to show the fulfillment of a promise. Your presuppositions matter when it comes to this kind of interpretation. If you presuppose God wrote this story, you won't see contrivance, but a fulfillment of prophecy. So what do you think about these points? Do you think vocab Post Malone street apologist here has a good point? Can atheists really not believe in typology? Or do you think he's potentially mixing up some positions that many people don't hold? Typological interpretations has us think about certain texts a little bit differently. It shows a way of reading that transcends surface-level textual analysis. It helps us see past the immediate narrative, recognizing how historical moments can carry deeper symbolic significances. This approach doesn't demand blind acceptance, but rather intellectual humility, an openness to seeing how meaning can be layered, complex, and interconnected. The beauty of scholarly engagement like this is not in reaching definitive conclusions, but in actually embracing the nuanced dialogue between different interpretive perspectives. Whether approaching texts from theological, historical, or critical viewpoints, we get a richer understanding that respects both the complexity of human experience and the potential for transcendent meaning. The exploration of typology reveals that interpretation is never neutral. Our presuppositions, philosophical commitments, and hermeneutical frameworks profoundly shape how we understand narrative. The most profound scholarship comes not from claiming absolute truth, but from maintaining intellectual curiosity, respecting alternative perspectives, and remaining open to deeper insights. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have been basically screaming at the screen the one point I did my absolute best to avoid as much as I could for this video. That is the whole, did they deliberately write to fulfill prophecy question. That is way more complicated than a simple yes or no. Ancient texts are like complex conversations across time, and pinning down exactly how that conversation happens, that is pretty tricky scholarly terrain. That's it for this one, but what do you think? I've given my perspective on typology, so now it's your turn. Do you see this style of argument in apologetics? What do you say if/when it comes up? Leave your responses in the comments. I love reading what you have to say. And really, we all benefit from seeing multiple angles on the same topic, and perhaps what works for one person could work better for you. The diversity of ideas I see in my comment section is quite inspiring. Thank you all to all of you who comment and work to keep my comment section arguably the most respectful of any channel of this type. Thank you. Man, why did I have to make this next sentence so hard? Though if you appreciate the technical typographical take to the typography topography, show that by hitting that like button. Though for more scholarly engagement, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to get slightly better than PowerPoint presentations quality content to inspire you to think just a bit better. And speaking of inspiring, I need to thank the most inspiring supporters, my patrons. Calamitous Anima, Sora, Long-Haired Lefty, Musical Ocelot, Ooga Booga Luga, Anonymous Netizen, Angel, Tarek Akasab, Jamminbomb, Kai Henningsen, and Triple Towel, who give me the flash of insight that allows me to keep my street smarts about me when dealing with street apologists. If you'd like to be motivated reasoning that keeps my channel operating, you can join them for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/darkofalltrades. Every single one of you not only keeps me going, but keeps me honest. Thank you, and please keep keeping me and everyone else in the comment section honest. And as always, keep learning.
So that